a cover-up underway, has been underway for quite some time, but now we know that Joe Biden was apparently not even allowed to be briefed. This article came out from the Telegram when we were debating about the lab leak hypothesis. They were calling us conspiracy theorists. As usual, our so-called conspiracy theories turn out to be true. Now this story from the Telegraph tells us the FBI did find evidence that COVID was from a lab leak over there in Wuhan, but they were not even allowed to brief the president. And so if the FBI is not allowed to brief the president, who is their boss, I guess the question is, who's really the boss of the FBI? Who's really in charge? The guy that you see here is called Jason Bannon, Bannan, not to be confused with Steve Bannon. And he has a lot to say about this. Here's what the article says here. It says the FBI did find evidence that there was a lab leak afoot, but they were not allowed to brief the president. The doctor of microbiology seen above was a senior scientist at the FBI, has dedicated more than a year of his life to try to figure out where this thing started. But despite being the only U.S. national intelligence agency to conclude that it was likely a lab leak, the FBI and Mr. Bannon were snubbed from a National Intelligence Council briefing with Joe Biden. Couldn't even tell him. Biden had ordered an urgent investigation in May 2021 by U.S. intelligence agencies and national laboratories to identify where the virus came from, whether it had been transferred from an animal to a human or had escaped from a Chinese lab. One of the most popular theories at the time was that it had been transferred from a bat at a wet market in Wuhan. Remember, they were saying all these animals were having intercourse with other animals or something, or humans or something. And they said, oh, a wet market. The National Intelligence Council, the NIC, body of senior intelligence officers, and we know how little we can trust these people, that organized the review, they'd concluded with low confidence that COVID had been transmitted from an animal to a human, along with 4 other intelligence agencies. And this is the same pattern that we see regularly. How can they be called intelligence agencies if they have no intelligence? If they say, oh, that's Russian misinformation operations. Turns out, no, it's just the CIA misinformation operation. This was presented by Avril Haines. You remember her, Director of National Intelligence, and 2 of her senior analysts to Joe Biden and his top aides in 21. So it sounds like all of their analysis and intelligence that went to Joe was wrong. The FBI, though, had not only concluded that a lab leak was likely, but it had moderate confidence in its assessment. And this is a strange position to be in because the FBI got it right. What? Obviously, this wasn't from some bat having intercourse with someone over in China. Wuhan was right there. Everybody could see from the beginning that the guys we'll talk about in the Wall Street Journal article coming up, like Daszak and the Lancet folks, were making up a cover story. Everybody could see it except the intelligence agencies. So who are they playing for? Are they owned by China or something? Or is it they're covering up for themselves? In his first interview, Mr. Bannon told the Wall Street Journal, we'll jump to that article, that being the only agency that assessed the lab origin was more likely coming from the lab, and that the agency expressed high levels of confidence. We anticipated the FBI would be asked to go to the briefing, but the White House didn't even ask. They didn't want to hear from us. And so the breaking story and the exclusive really came over from the Wall Street Journal. Here's what this one said. You can see a big article here that was detailing the depth of this cover-up. We'll hit the highlights, but they're entitling this Behind Closed Doors, the spy world scientist who argued COVID was a lab leak versus the animal having intercourse with themselves story. A car and driver were ready to whisk John Bannon, the guy that we just talked about, ready to go. Take him from the FBI headquarters one morning in August to go brief the White House. He had been told by his superiors who were on hand to be there because they needed to tell the president what was going on. But guess what? The White House never called for them, never got a summons. Bannon is somebody who's got some expertise, PhD in microbiology, worked on the 2001 terrorist attacks, but for more than a year, he'd spent most of his hours working on COVID. Frustrated by the Chinese stonewalling, Biden ordered a quick review, said, you guys go figure out where this came from. Now, the dominant view within the intelligence community was clear when Avril Haines, the DNI, and a couple of her aides, Biden on August 24th, with fake news, made up information. The National Intelligence Council, a body of these senior folks, said they had low confidence that this came from intercourse. At the time, the FBI was the only agency who said no. And the White House didn't even ask. You guys have the wrong answer. We don't care what you have to say. A spokeswoman for the DNI said it wasn't standard practice to invite different people who've got divergent views. So this is not like a debate, okay? We just present what we decide to present. And that's all we need to show the president. But an investigation by the Wall Street Journal shows that the disagreements among intelligence experts over what should be included in the report ran way deeper than what was publicly known. Nor were the FBI scientists the only ones who believed that they were wrong, that this did come from a lab. 3 scientists at the National Center for Medical Intelligence, part of the Pentagon's agency, conducted a scientific study that said, yep, COVID was manipulated in a laboratory in a risky research effort. But that analysis went against the other intelligence agencies, and it wasn't incorporated in the report. The Inspector General's office opened an inquiry in the spring into whether the scientist assessment were mishandled or suppressed. An agency spokesperson declined to comment. This is very problematic if they are not telling. Now, look, let's be clear. Joe Biden doesn't know anything anyways. You could have told him all of this. Not sure it would have changed anything because he's not really in charge. But the fact that we have intelligence agencies who are subordinating the presidency to their intelligence is insane. It's anti-democratic and anti-American. Should never happen in this country. 5 years after COVID emerged, the origin of the virus that killed more than 1.2 million Americans and over 7 million people has yet to be established. The pace of the intelligence investigation has lessened. The people who are investigating have gone elsewhere. Now, they urged a real quick sprint. Remember that. 2 theories emerged. We spent a lot of time talking about this back during the COVID era, a lot of time talking about the origins of COVID. And Kristen Anderson, he was one of the people who wrote in the Lancet, along with others, who said, no, Peter Daszak, remember him, EcoHealth Alliance. These guys were out there splicing and dicing viruses together. And we had that one article that explained that they were the furin cleavage site, where, like Frankenstein's monster, they would chop off the head of one virus and attach it to the body of another. And you could see it in COVID, according to some experts. Now, that statement was followed by a bunch of propaganda, but the lab theory later gained credibility because Ralph Baric, this guy, had done some pioneering work on this and determined that there was some pretty risky research going on over there. But by the time Biden ordered his review, the intelligence agencies, who have no intelligence at all, said it was a zoonotic theory. And only the FBI said it was a lab leak. The intelligence agencies that drilled into the issue brought a range of capabilities that had no capabilities at all. Except they did bring this guy in, Bannon. Went to U of A, shout out Arizona. He was serving as senior scientist in Quantico, got a call from a superior, said, can you help us? He went to the FBI's near empty Hoover building because all the FBI agents were at homes with their triple face masks on. We might die. Oh no. So they had to evacuate the Hoover building. This guy shows up. He's like, where's the virus? So as most government employees were still working remotely, this guy showed up. He's like, yeah, it came from a lab. The inquiry was barely underway when divisions emerged in the initial conference calls. He's like, it came from a lab. They're like, no, it didn't. It came from monkeys and bats. Much of the intelligence community was dismissive about the origins because they think that the Chinese were putting pressure on people. The FBI was already supporting the lab leak theory. Keane, who had a PhD in infectious diseases from London, left the State Department and was investigating this, but Beijing was not cooperating at all. Much of the debate turned on what was known about previous coronaviruses and Wuhan Institute of Virology. Then we had another debate emerge. We were asking about that specific lab, But Keene took the view that the geographic origin of the virus wasn't really important, where it emerged from. That left two other sides far apart. Others came in, and many were briefed. They briefed their counterparts, including one of Bannon's partners, another FBI agent with a PhD, on their initial findings. But in July 2021, they were instructed by a superior at the Medical Intelligence Center not to continue sharing their work with the FBI, which they were told was off the reservation. Okay. They're not following the narrative, so you can't work with them anymore. Hardin and others, Cutlip and Gretchen, wrote an unclassified May 2020 paper that challenged the proximal origin assessment. They weren't allowed to circulate it outside the Medical Intelligence Center, but leaked it 3 years later after they got done lying to us. Retired Army Lieutenant General Scott Berrier, the DIA director during the report's preparation, didn't comment on this. The intelligence officials who briefed Biden in August of 2021 all wore masks to protect them. They all sitting there. Oh no, we have no idea. It came from bats in a wet market. The participants included Haynes, other top officials who were sitting there lying, including the CIA, lying to the president. No, do you think it came from a zoo? Wet market, right? How about you? Wet market? Yeah, definitely wet. Our analysis is wet market. Yeah, we spent $5 billion, came from a wet market. Great job. Since the National Intelligence Council was among the proponents of the zoonotic theory, and the CIA, like the two other agencies, had declined to take a stand. We don't know. We're just the CIA. What the hell do we know? A spokesman for Haynes' office said that all this was accurately presented as we understood it. More than 3 years later, the intelligence agencies continue to investigate. They still don't know. In one sign that some government agencies are still looking at the issue, the Energy Department joined the FBI and said, yeah, probably a lab. In June 2023, there was a report. Haynes and her office declassified more info about Wuhan, and others have now retired. So this guy's gone. Bannon is now kept a low profile. They're like, man, you keep speaking out, you're going to get a nice little bullet to the earlobe. He hasn't been among the parade of witnesses who has appeared in the often partisan debates. Among those who testified, Fauci, we know what we think about him. Fauci denied ever calling the lab leak a conspiracy theory and says that scenario can't be excluded. Okay, sure, Fauci. In August, the intelligence report suggests a conclusive assessment about the virus's origin cannot be made without China cooperating. Bannon is still urging people to take a look at this again. He says a bunch of information was excluded. What ended up on the intelligence community's cutting room floor needs to be re-examined. So all of the information that they threw out and never presented to the president and never presented to us, the public, about any of this is disgusting. How can you live in a so-called democratic society when our intelligence agencies aren't even briefing the president about the facts? And you've got a disagreement between the two. Isn't that exactly what you should be briefed on? You don't necessarily need to be briefed on, if you're the president and a good leader, on what the consensus is, because you already know what the consensus is. Okay, well, what is the non-consensus view? What is the opposing view? Okay, who's thinking outside the box on these? I know everybody in the room just wants to bomb everybody. I know, I got it. But anybody else have any other ideas about this? Or vice versa? I know you want to mandate everybody to take 1,000 of your products without any consequence to you, and the government will pay for it all. But does anybody else have any other theories? Like maybe we know where it came from, and this is not a weapon, or maybe it is a weapon, and we have to think about it. Maybe have some different conversations. You should know about the dissenting views, but they didn't. They kept it from Joe Biden. Now, he's an incompetent person, and so he may not have been able to do anything with the information. But regardless, this is not something that should be allowed to happen in our country. I'm happy that this is being exposed. Hopefully, Trump's people come in and take a look at this. Sounds like there might be a racketeering case here. All right, so that is what happened there from the Wall Street Journal. I'm still mad about COVID, as you can tell.